All right, we can do this. We can do it short and sweet tonight. Hi, shares in Trump Media plunged more than 18% on Monday, closing at $26.63. Donald Trump's Truth Social stock has lost 60% of its market value since March 26, right around the time it began trading on the NASDAQ, and his Maga Morons had an opportunity to buy in. The stock tumbled after Trump Media told the SEC yesterday it's planning to issue close to 170 million more shares of the company, which would raise much-needed capital while at the same time diluting the value of the shares that have already been sold to these Maga Morons. You see, the more shares of the company being sold, that means the less value a single share has. Well, I get all my financial advice from John Ross, and he says now is the time for Maga Morons to swoop in and let it all ride on Trump Media. And that's what I would do if I were a Trump supporter. I mean, the guy was president of the United States. There's just no way this stock can go down any lower than it already has. You know, they always say you should buy a stock when its price to earnings ratio is low. You know, that means it's undervalued. Well, I looked at Trump Media, and it has a PE of negative 45. It has a PE of negative 45. I mean, that's crazy undervalued. Sure, it lost $54 million last year, and it shows no sign of ever turning a profit, but it's Donald Trump's company, okay? He was president of the United States. Don't listen to me. Listen to my friend John Ross. He says buying Trump Media is safer than buying a treasury bond. What is safer than a treasury bond? Trump Media stock. A Trump Media stock is the safest. It's safer than gold. A treasury bond is only backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of America. But Trump Media, that's backed by the full faith and credit of Donald J. Trump, who is a billionaire. Look, it would be really irresponsible of me to dispense bad financial advice on this program. Now, listen to me. I'm only talking to Trump supporters. If you're a Trump supporter, listen to me. Let it all ride. Everything you have. Remove the gold fillings in your teeth, melt it down, and let it all ride on Trump Media. John Ross tells me this is like buying Apple when it was just pennies. I'm telling you, go buy Truth Social. You will kick yourself. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. This is the mop-up for April 16th. 2024. I'm David Feldman, and I'm going to do a short show today. It's going to be a short show. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. Donald Trump spent most of yesterday stewing inside a Manhattan courtroom as jury selection began in his first ever criminal trial, where he is charged with 34 felony counts for falsifying documents to hide hush money payments that he made to porn star Stormy Daniels in the weeks leading up to the 2016 presidential election. As you know, I live in New York City, and yesterday was historic. It was the first time an American president ever went on trial in a criminal courtroom, and you know, Trump supporters, they're not standing for this. Tens of thousands of Trump supporters did not flood in from all over the country to show their support for their beloved leader. Crickets. Absolutely nobody showed up. It was amazing. You know, Trump is always saying, you put me on trial, I can't control my Maga Morons. They're not going to stand for this. Apparently they will. Apparently they can't stand for anything because they're too effing lazy. Remember how everyone said, well, if you put Donald Trump on trial, his supporters will storm the courthouse. They'll riot. No, they won't. No, they won't. A pro-Trump rally was scheduled outside the courtroom. And according to Politico, there were more members of the media covering this pro-Trump rally than there were Trump supporters in attendance. Not exactly January 6th, is it? Funny thing about rounding up all those January 6ers and locking them up for 10, 20 years sends a message to all the other MAGA D-bags to stay home. Funny how that works, isn't it? Now, I'm sure the judges in all these Trump trials, the civil and criminal Trump trials, I'm sure they're afraid to lock Trump up overnight for violating a gag order because they're worried about the Trump mob. Well, the Trump mob has moved on. Yeah, they're going to vote for him, maybe, but they're not going to risk a jail sentence trying to spring this D-bag from prison. The only MAGA celebrity in attendance was former congressional candidate Laura Loomer. And if you don't know who Laura Loomer is, you are so lucky. Laura Loomer showed up. She carried a bullhorn shouting, quote, "Trump did nothing wrong." She shouted this to 3 Trump supporters, 6 rats, and 400 members of the media. Monday was the first day in a trial that is scheduled to last 8 weeks. It's hard to imagine what's going on inside Trump's fevered mind. We know he's angry, which means he's frightened. But does he know he's frightened? Anyone, even a sociopath like Donald Trump, sitting inside a stark, barren, austere New York City criminal courtroom must have a moment of self-reflection and doubt. Trump is a malignant narcissist. He's incapable of accepting blame or responsibility, but he does possess a sense of danger. He knows when he's in trouble, which he is. And while he lacks impulse control, he will act before considering the consequences. He also clearly has the ability to project into the future and imagine what life has in store for him should he lose in November. That's why he's trying so hard to win. Behind that bravado is even more bravado and certitude. He's indefatigable. But for the next 8 weeks of Donald Trump's life, well, it's going to be far different from how it's ever been for him in the past. Donald Trump has to be in that courtroom, and this, being in that courtroom, will cut off his oxygen supply. What is his oxygen supply? The big campaign rallies. Those are the only places where he feels anything resembling love and acceptance. He's certainly not getting it from Melania, especially now when he goes on trial for paying hush money to a porn star he slept with, a porn star he had sex with, didn't use a condom, just weeks after she gave birth to his son. Did I mention he didn't use a condom? Trump is spending the next couple of nights in Trump Tower. He rarely sleeps there anymore because that's where Melania lives. She's supposed to get Trump Tower in the divorce, but Letitia James is going to be selling it. Melania reportedly lives in Trump Tower, supposedly with a Secret Service agent who she's taken up with. At least that's what people are saying. That's what I've heard. I don't know if it's true. I hope it's not true. I would hate to see Donald Trump cucked by a former Secret Service agent who was supposed to protect him and instead is sleeping with Melania. I mean, I hope that's not true, but that's what people are saying. That's the talk on the street. They're saying that Trump's wife, Melania, is sleeping with a former Secret Service agent. Again, I have no idea if that's true. It's what I keep hearing coming out of my mouth. I keep hearing me say that Melania is sleeping with a former Secret Service agent. I hope it's not true, but I keep hearing me say that. And why would people constantly be saying this if it weren't true? And by people constantly saying this, I mean mostly me saying it. But I have heard the rumor from me that she's sleeping with a former secret. No, I have heard that rumor. And it's not good to spread rumors, so I hope it's not true. I would hate to think that Donald Trump is being cheated on because he would never cheat on her. So without Melania, without the smelly, nicotine-stained mob that always shows up to his rallies, Trump right now is isolated, alone with his thoughts. And that's a sad and dangerous place for Donald Trump to be. See, all eyes will be on him in that courtroom, but he is not allowed to act out, which is torture for somebody like Donald Trump. A crowd he can't misbehave in front of. So it will be really interesting if he can keep it under control for the next 8 weeks, because he has to. And yet we know he can't. He is incapable of keeping it under control. We know he couldn't behave during the E. Jean Carroll trial. He kept heckling her, the judge, the jury. At one point in the E. Jean Carroll trial, he dared Judge Kaplan to lock him up. This won't be the civil fraud trial where he lashed out at Judge Arthur Engoron, Arthur Engoron's entire staff, Letitia James, where he just kept lashing out and making a fool out of himself. These were civil trials. This time, he's in a criminal courtroom. This time, the consequences are no longer fines that he can slow walk through the appeals process. This time, bad behavior won't only result in jail time, it will move the jury in such a way that he could actually face prison time. Well, the general consensus among legal scholars is, if we're lucky, we're talking of possibly 4 years in prison if Donald Trump is found guilty on a combination of the roughly 35 felony charges he faces in this trial. Now, each of the 35 felony charges carries with them a 5-year non-mandatory maximum sentence. And nobody expects Donald Trump to be sentenced to, 150, 170 some odd years in prison. But it's nice to think about it, isn't it? And who knows? Who knows? I do. He's not going to prison, at least with this trial. There's a pretty good chance he's going to get convicted and he'll lose on all his appeals, but he's never going to do prison time for what he's been charged with in this criminal trial. But there are other things that are more important than watching him go to prison. We're probably going to have a guilty verdict right after Memorial Day. And yes, he'll tie it all up in the appeals courts. But polling shows that about 25% of Republicans who say they're planning to vote for Donald Trump also say they wouldn't vote for him if he was convicted in any of the 4 criminal trials. Then again, Republicans always find a way to worm themselves out of not voting for Trump. They always somehow come up with an excuse for voting for this deplorable piece of human excrement, even though they swore they never would. I saw it Sunday when Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, a huge Nikki Haley supporter, who called Trump unqualified to serve again as president. Well, on Sunday, Sununu said he's voting for Trump. So who knows with these animals like Sununu? Who knows? No. Well, what struck me Monday was how Trump got spoken to by New York Supreme Court Justice Juan M. Merchan. He was spoken to in a manner that Donald Trump's far from accustomed to, especially in the years following the White House, where Trump has only surrounded himself with sycophants who wouldn't dare question or challenge him. But on Monday, a stern Judge Merchan told Trump to his face that disruptions in my courtroom will not be tolerated. He said, if you misbehave while my court is in session, there is a distinct possibility I will jail you. Judge Merchan repeatedly asked, do you understand? And Trump nodded his head affirmatively like a child. When Judge Merchan said, I expect you to behave, is that clear? And Trump said, yes, Your Honor. You know how hard it is for him to behave that way? You know how much it eats Donald Trump inside to say to Judge Merchan, yes, Your Honor? Trump clearly understands the gravitas of the situation he's found himself in. When Judge Merchan told Trump he is expected to appear in court every single day the jurors are in attendance, the judge warned Trump that if he fails to show up, marshals will be sent to track him down and he will be jailed. Is that clear? Do you understand what I just told you? And Trump said, yes, Your Honor. You know, in many ways for Trump, that's punishment enough. You know he's not going to prison for this, but this is eating him up alive. And outside the courtroom on Monday, after he was humiliated by Judge Merchan, Trump went from being an obedient little puppy to singing a completely different tune, telling reporters, this judge is biased. He said the trial is a scam. He said it's an assault on America. He called it political persecution. But inside that courtroom, he sat quietly, respectfully, at times catching himself as he briefly dozed off, occasionally glowering with his arms folded, fully aware that at least for the time being, his destiny sits in the cold, clammy hands of the New York City criminal justice system. Again, should Trump somehow find his way back inside the Oval Office, he, as president, would lack any pardon power to make a city or state conviction go away. His pardon power only extends to federal crimes. Prosecutors began the first day of Trump's criminal trial, wasting no time asking the judge to fine Donald Trump $3,000, accusing him of already violating the gag order imposed on Trump, forbidding him from disparaging witnesses like his former fixer, now a key witness for the prosecution, attorney Michael Cohen. Trump's attorneys defended Trump's social media posts that disparaged Cohen. They said Trump's attacks against Michael Cohen were necessary because they were political in nature, and Trump is in the middle of a presidential campaign. But it fell on deaf ears. The judge dismissed the argument offered by Trump's lawyers. he dismissed the argument by ordering them to reread his gag order. A hearing was then scheduled for next week to determine whether Donald Trump has, in fact, already violated the gag order, not just with his attack on witnesses like Michael Cohen, but also with his continued attacks against the judge's daughter, who the amended gag order called off limits. Prosecutors made clear on Monday that should Trump continue to violate the gag order, they will request more than just a fine. They will ask for jail time. It was only the first day, and already threats of jail time for Donald Trump were getting thrown around. It was almost as though both the judge and the prosecutor were sending a message to Trump that this is not another one of your 4,000 civil lawsuits you've been party to throughout your professional life. Today, you're inside a New York City criminal courtroom because this is a criminal indictment. This isn't the E. Jean Carroll trial where a jury finds you guilty of rape but only orders you to pay punitive damages. This isn't the New York State civil fraud trial, where a judge rules you did, in fact, defraud lenders, but because it's a civil lawsuit, only forces you to pay $500 million fine. This is a criminal trial, the first of 4 this year. And each one of the 34 some odd counts that Donald Trump has been charged with, well, they carry with them a possible 5-year sentence. Again, nobody thinks Donald Trump is going to get sentenced to prison for this. But you never know. And nobody thinks he's going to get a prison sentence if and when his stooge, Judge Eileen Cannon down in Miami, ever gets around to allowing his trial for violating the Espionage Act to proceed. But that RICO trial down in Georgia, the one he's trying to delay, those are some serious charges, and even, God forbid, if he gets elected president, he cannot pardon those convictions away. And Jack Smith's election interference trial in D.C., also very serious. Trump is looking at prison there, unless he gets elected president, in which case he can make that trial and or conviction disappear. But if Trump doesn't win in November, Jack Smith, the special counsel, is never going to stop. If Trump loses in November, Jack Smith opens up a new raft of indictments charging Trump with wire fraud. Wire fraud that has made a mockery of our criminal justice system. It is wire fraud that has created Trump's bottomless source of cash to pay his legal fees. People say, how does Trump get to delay? He's got an endless fire hose of cash from his super PAC to pay these lawyers. Trump, according to the New York Times, has spent more than $100 million on attorneys since he left the White House. And all of that has been paid for by his Maga Morons donating to his Save America PAC. Maybe it's legal to use super PAC money to pay your legal fees. Maybe it's not, but we're never going to find out because the Federal Election Commission has 3 Republicans sitting on it, 3 Democrats, and those 3 Republicans would never question Donald Trump using super PAC money to pay his legal fees. So we're never going to find out if it's legal to use super PAC money to dole out $100 million in legal fees. And by the way, he's raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in that super PAC. Where has it gone? Can you say Vladimir Putin? So we'll never find out whether or not it's legal for him to use this money to pay his legal fees. But what is not legal is raising hundreds of millions of dollars over the internet since leaving the Oval Office, raising hundreds of millions of dollars, promising donors their money will be spent investigating voter fraud, and instead using all those donations to pay Trump's legal fees. That, by its very definition, is wire fraud. And from what I'm hearing, when Trump loses in November, there's a whole new batch of indictments coming down from Jack Smith's office looking into where exactly all the money donated to Trump's super PAC went. So we know Trump's a sociopath. We know that, does he really get frightened? Does it register with him? Yes, he's terrified. That's why it comes out through anger. He knows he has to win in November. This trial inside the Manhattan courtroom, and it started on Monday. They could not delay it away. This is a dress rehearsal for the real hell in store for Donald Trump, especially after he loses in November. Again, the only way out of this for Trump is winning in November. It's not looking too good. The trend lines are pointing away from Donald Trump. The latest real clear polling averages show Joe Biden closing in on Donald Trump, with Trump leading Biden by 0.02%. That's a virtual tie, okay? The thing to keep in mind with the real clear polling averages, Real Clear Politics has always had a slight conservative bent. Not only that, the Real Clear averages include polling from 11 trusted pollsters. But one of those pollsters is not to be trusted. Rasmussen. Who is an unreliable right-wing propaganda arm for the Republican Party. And a lot of people I've talked to over the years say Rasmussen should never be taken seriously. So in the Real Clear polling averages, Rasmussen shows Trump leading Biden by 8 points. Trump is, that's the only poll where there's a blowout for Trump, and they show him leading Biden by 8 points. There's also a Fox News poll that's part of this Real Clear Politics polling average basket. And Fox News shows Trump leading Biden by 5 points. So, to be fair, Fox News polls are way more trustworthy than Rasmussen. But if you remove Rasmussen and Fox News from the mix and only include the 9 pollsters, then you have Biden beating Trump in the national averages. This is tremendous. Biden, since the State of the Union, has stopped the slide and is actually erasing his deficit against Donald Trump in the national polling. But this election is won in the swing states. And yesterday I went over new polling in the swing states showing Trump at a distinct disadvantage. But this election, again, it's got to be won in the swing states. Trump, right now, and these are older polls, is looking okay in the swing states, but the trend lines are going down, and trend lines stay in motion. It's really hard. We see these trend lines, it's very hard to reverse them. Things in motion stay in motion. Trump's support is deteriorating. For example, Arizona, which Joe Biden won in 2020, Hillary lost in 2016, Trump is barely leading within the margin of error, and those polls, at least half of them, were taken before Biden's State of the Union. In Nevada, Trump is beating Biden barely, but those polls are mostly before the State of the Union and within the margin of error. In Wisconsin, which has been iffy for Biden, he won Wisconsin in 2020. Hillary lost it in 2016. The latest polling shows Joe Biden pulling ahead of Trump. In Michigan, Trump is leading. He lost Michigan to Biden in 2020. He beat Hillary in Michigan in 2016. Older polling pre-State of the Union shows Trump barely leading Biden within the margin of error. Biden is leading in Pennsylvania. Remember, Joe Biden, all he needs to do is win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. He gets to 270. I just don't see how he loses Pennsylvania or Michigan. If he loses Wisconsin, he needs to swap out either Georgia or Arizona, which he won in 2020 and Hillary didn't. And now North Carolina is in the game. And shocking polls coming out of North Carolina show a dead heat between Trump and Biden. Georgia, we've seen some deterioration for Biden in Georgia, but it's still within the margin of error. So when it comes to the swing states, a month ago, you would say, and we did say, that Biden was in trouble. The overall trend lines in the swing states are now showing Biden heading up and Trump going down, like his Trump media stock. Not only that, Trump, for the next 8 weeks, between now and Labor Day, Trump will be stuck inside a New York City courtroom. He can't go to his rallies. He can do them on the weekends. He's got to sit in that courtroom and sulk and glower and fume. There's talk that he may be able to do rallies on Wednesdays, since court will only be in session 4 days a week. Wednesday, as they say in show business, is dark. You can't it's hump day. You can't have a trial on hump day. I don't know why, but Wednesdays, I guess Monday and Tuesday, they have to sit with Trump in the courtroom, and then they spend all of Wednesday showering, getting the stench of Donald Trump off themselves, and then they resume on Thursday and Friday. So, for the next 8 weeks, most of the focus on this show will, and politically and in the news, will be embarrassing testimony for Donald Trump. Embarrassing testimony from his former fixer, Michael Cohen, and of course, Stormy Daniels, who he had sex with sans condom. This trial carries with it, again, at least the threat of prison time for Trump. But what are we talking about here? Sex. This is about sex. Sex with a porn star and sex with a playmate model, a Playboy playmate. Voters will be hanging on every word. They will be following this trial. This isn't dry like the violation of the Espionage Act. This is wet. Porn stars, Playboy playmates, cheating on Melania, not wearing a condom, cheating on Melania while she's pregnant, cheating on Melania right after she just had a baby. We're going to be following this and pretend it's about the future of our country and democracy being at stake. But this is sex, and it's humiliating for Donald Trump. And while his Maga morons are incapable of feeling disgust for him, there are still some people on the fence who will be reminded that Donald Trump cheated on Melania with a Playboy playmate while she was pregnant with their son. And then after she gave birth, he cheated on her again with Stormy Daniels. He didn't wear a condom. After Melania gave birth, he cheated on her again, did not wear a condom. I doubt his not wearing a condom will be entered into evidence. But look, personally, I don't judge anybody when it comes to sex, but Republicans do. There are the Maga morons, worthless, brain-dead idiots who are going to vote for Trump no matter what. But then there are your run-of-the-mill, paleo-conservative, worthless, brain-dead, idiot Republicans who consider themselves religious and conservative. Some of them, some are not going to like what they hear about Donald Trump coming out of this trial. Some of them, some might say, I'm going to vote for Trump. But come election day, they just forget to show up. Look at this. This is from Axios 2 weeks ago. It's a chart of protest votes in the primaries against Joe Biden and protest votes against Donald Trump after Nikki Haley dropped out. Now, we know there have been some protest votes against Joe Biden for his handling of Gaza. It started in Michigan, it spread to Minnesota, and then it kind of died off by the time it got to Washington. But look at these protest votes here. About 25% of Republicans, after Nikki Haley dropped out, came and voted in the Republican primaries for somebody other than Donald Trump. So I'm going to post this. I'll go big here. So if you look at Biden in, say, Wisconsin, which is a swing state, in the Wisconsin primary, he got 89% of the vote. Trump got 79%. In Ohio, which used to be a swing state, Biden gets 87% of the primary vote. Donald Trump got 79%. Who did they vote for? There was nobody to vote for. Nikki Haley dropped out. In Arizona, Biden gets 89% of the vote. Trump, 79%. In Georgia, Joe Biden gets 95% of the vote. In Georgia, Trump gets 85%. What does that tell you? It tells you that at least 25% of Republican primary voters refused to cast a ballot for Trump, even though there was really nobody running against him. That's a serious protest vote. And when you compare the protest votes that Trump has versus Joe Biden, Trump has a way more serious problem with likely Republican voters than Joe Biden has with likely Democratic voters. Again, Republicans showed up After Nikki Haley dropped out, 25% of them did not vote for Donald Trump, even though there was nobody to vote for. And even if Nikki Haley was on the ballot, there was still nobody to vote for because she's a cipher. Like I said, Trump is expected to be in that Manhattan criminal courtroom every second the jury is in attendance. On Monday, Trump's lawyers asked for a one-day exception so Trump could attend his son's high school graduation in Florida. The judge was unmoved by the request and said he will take it under consideration. He said, "I'll decide later as to whether or not the defendant can attend his son's high school graduation. It all depends on how everyone does keeping this trial on schedule." Judge Juan Merchan was putting out a veiled warning to Trump and his lawyers that there will be consequences should they attempt to delay the trial by slowing down jury selection, which normally takes about a week and a half, maybe two. But jury selection can last longer if Trump's lawyers exploit several loopholes that allow them to belabor the choice of each juror with unnecessary peremptory challenges. In other words, the judge said, "You want to see your kid graduate from high school? Then knock it off with the delays." Now, we saw a lot of tough talk on Monday from Judge Juan Merchan. We'll see if it continues. On April 25th, the United States Supreme Court begins oral arguments on presidential immunity. They should never have taken this case. But there will be no election interference trial in Washington, D.C. for Donald Trump. There will be no Espionage Act violation trial in Miami if the court does the unimaginable and rules that Donald Trump has absolute immunity. The Supreme Court scheduled oral arguments for this. They put it in the docket for the latest date possible. They're helping Trump delay. So the oral arguments are on the 22nd, and they should, if there were any justice in the Supreme Court, they would hand down a ruling the very next day saying what we all know, and that is there's no such thing as presidential immunity. But because it's this Supreme Court, they could wait until June. For all we know, the court could refuse to hand down a ruling on presidential immunity until after the election. You never know. Trump's lawyers asked Judge Juan Merchan on Monday. They asked for permission so that Trump could miss a day in the Manhattan courtroom in order for him to attend next week's big Supreme Court hearings. Judge Juan Merchan turned down the request. He said, "It isn't necessary for the defendant to be in Washington, D.C. to hear oral arguments. However, the defendant's attendance is mandatory in my courtroom." Judge Merchan said that while it is a big deal to be part of a case argued before the Supreme Court, it's also a big deal to be tried here inside a New York City criminal courtroom. Okay, we'll see, if he keeps up, if the judge keeps up this tone, it'll be nice. Trump isn't going to prison, but this is a form of torture for him. Well, outside the courtroom, Trump exploded. Can't do it in the courtroom yet. We'll see if he can contain himself. Outside the courtroom, Trump immediately lashed out at the judge, which he can do according to the amended gag order. Trump is allowed to attack the judge and the prosecutor, not their families. He accused Judge Mershon of thinking he's, quote, superior to the Supreme Court because he won't let Donald Trump go to the oral arguments. Trump then whined, I'm not in Georgia or Florida or North Carolina campaigning like I should be. Instead, I'm stuck in this criminal courtroom, which is perfect for the radical left Democrats. This is exactly what they want. Yeah, I wish you were right about Joe Biden being a radical lefty. He's anything but this is exactly what we want. We like to see you suffer. Yes, this is exactly what we want. Again, I know you're not going to prison, but you're pushing 80, and just to sit in a courtroom and be humiliated about your sex life for 8 weeks, this is exactly what this radical lefty wanted, and he got it. Can't be fun for Donald Trump. Yesterday began with prosecutors and defense attorneys hashing out, and this was delicious, hashing out what information about Donald Trump's personal life could be introduced without it being prejudicial to the jury. So but it's for public consumption, and Trump had to sit there. So everybody got to hear the prosecutor, the judge, and the defense attorneys arguing what can and can't be introduced into the trial. Trump sat there as prosecutors entered into the public record embarrassing tidbits about his history of infidelities. But I doubt any of his infidelities really bother Trump. I don't think they embarrass him. Certainly, they don't embarrass him the way Letitia James in the New York State civil fraud trial embarrassed him by telling the judge and the media every day that Donald Trump is not a billionaire. That was an attack on Donald Trump's manhood. This criminal trial is a celebration of all the manhood Letitia James stripped from Donald Trump in the civil fraud trial. He's probably proud that he cheated on Melania. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up, but what is this case about other than sex? And what kind of defense will Trump mount? Prosecutors are charging Trump with trying to silence Stormy Daniels so she wouldn't step forward and tell the world she had a sexual encounter with Donald Trump without a condom. He had sex with Stormy Daniels without a condom only weeks after Trump's wife, Melania, gave birth to his son. The same son whose graduation Trump insists it's so important for him to attend. Another piece of evidence that was talked about yesterday, prosecutors want to introduce to the jurors an affair that Trump carried on with Playboy playmate Karen McDougal, whose story, like Stormy Daniels, was also purchased by David Pecker from the National Enquirer as part of their catch and kill strategy to keep information like this from becoming public in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. To refresh your memory, it's a little confusing, so I'll try to help you here. To refresh your memory, Trump and the National Enquirer worked out an agreement where the tabloid, the National Enquirer, would pay six figures for the exclusive rights to Stormy Daniels, as well as Karen McDougal's stories about their sexual encounters with Donald Trump without a condom. The National Enquirer would pay to catch the story, and then they would kill it by refusing to publish it, catch and kill. And since they had exclusive rights, they purchased exclusive rights to these stories, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal couldn't shop their story to another tabloid or even tell their story to anybody. In effect, the six figures they were paid silenced them from telling anyone other than the National Enquirer about their affairs with Donald Trump. Catch the story, pay for it, kill it, and they're sworn to secrecy. They get fined. They have to return the money they were paid, and then some. So they stay quiet. Prosecutors say after the Enquirer made the payments, they were then reimbursed, by Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, his attorney. And then through a series of LLCs and shell companies and forged documents, Donald Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for the payments he made to the National Enquirer, which paid Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal to keep their mouths shut. Got it? The National Enquirer pays these two women to keep their mouths shut. Michael Cohen reimburses the National Enquirer for those payments, and then Donald Trump reimburses Michael Cohen for reimbursing the National Enquirer. And a lot of those checks were cut to Michael Cohen inside the White House. Michael Cohen would come to the White House and collect the checks he was owed. It is illegal to do that for many reasons. The Manhattan District Attorney considers these hush money payments to be against the law since they essentially, for many reasons, one is because they served as presidential campaign contributions in kind, a campaign contribution in kind. You're not allowed to donate to a presidential candidate if you're a corporation. You can't donate directly to a president if you're a corporation, and there's a limit. I think it's $7,000. Well, these were campaign contributions that were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that violates campaign finance law. These are considered contributions in kind. In other words, and this is where it gets dodgy. This is why this case is not a slam dunk. I cannot give Joe Biden $100,000 directly. If I said to him, hey, you know what? I own an auditorium in New York City. Come use it to do a fundraiser. That would be against the law because it would be called a contribution in kind. What is the value of loaning out my auditorium for a fundraiser? Well, normally I can get, $50,000 a night for my auditorium, but by letting Biden use it for free, it is considered a contribution in kind of $50,000. I didn't give him $50,000 in cash. I gave him use of an auditorium that was worth $50,000, and that's called a contribution in kind. It's hard to prosecute these things because people if George Clooney endorses Joe Biden in a way that's, he gets paid $3 million to do a commercial for Nespresso or Chanel. If he does a commercial for Joe Biden, one could say that's a $3 million contribution in kind. So this is tricky. Paying women to remain silent about sex with a presidential candidate, according to the Manhattan DA, according to the indictment, is tantamount to making illegal campaign contributions. And more importantly, according to the prosecutor, Trump's attempts to disguise the payments through Michael Cohen, who then reimbursed the National Enquirer. According to prosecutors, Trump was committing the crime of forging documents and defrauding the Federal Elections Commission. To be honest, at first blush, this has always seemed like a bit of a stretch. But legal scholars, much smarter than I, are saying no. I was reading this morning, a legal scholar was saying, at first I thought this was a ridiculous case, but now they've read the indictments and they say, no, they've got a good case against Trump. They say that Trump knew exactly what he was doing and he knew it was all illegal, not to mention the fact that Michael Cohen, Trump's fixer and attorney, ended up going to prison after pleading guilty to violating federal campaign finance laws when he arranged for the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. So Michael Cohen has already served time for what Donald Trump is being charged with in this trial. So yes, campaign finance law is Byzantine. It's really hard to unravel, and people rarely get sentenced to prison for violating it. But Michael Cohen did. Michael Cohen did time for the very same crimes Trump is now charged with in this trial. It is illegal for Trump to arrange with the National Enquirer to buy up potentially embarrassing stories and then silence the women with those stories with exclusive contracts that only allow them to discuss Donald Trump in the pages of the National Enquirer, even if the National Enquirer never published the stories. Yes, it's illegal. But, here is the argument I think you're going to hear from Trump's lawyers. Now, they haven't told us what they're going to plead. But I suspect Trump's lawyers will try to convince the jury that these hush money payments weren't about hiding the story from voters. They're going to say Trump was paying the money to hide the story from his wife, Melania. Trump's attorneys are probably going to claim that Donald Trump couldn't care less if voters discover he had sex with a porn star or a Playboy playmate. In fact, it's part of his brand. His voters would celebrate those affairs as conquests. They don't care. And that is a legitimate argument. Do you think anybody in 2016 would say, I can't vote for Donald Trump, he cheated on his wife? I don't think so. But they're going to claim that all these hush money payments was all about Melania finding out. Look, I want Trump in prison for the rest of his life, and Melania. I'm not buying this argument, but it is reasonable. It is reasonable, and it may work. So, how much of Trump's personal history can be introduced to the jury? prosecutors on Monday said they wanted to tell the jury that Trump's affair with Karen McDougal, the Playboy Playmate, his affair with Karen McDougal took place while Melania was pregnant with Trump's son. You know, the one whose graduation Donald wants to attend just as soon as he can remember what his name is. So the prosecutors asked the judge, we would like to tell the jury that the Karen McDougal affair took place while Melania was pregnant with their son. On Monday, Trump's lawyers argued that the jury should only be told that Trump had the affair with Karen McDougal because it is germane to this trial. That's where the hush money was paid. But Trump's lawyer said the jury should not be allowed to be informed that Trump carried on the affair while Melania was pregnant with their son. They fought tooth and nail on Monday for that information to be withheld from the jurors. Trump's attorneys argued that should the jury learn that Melania was pregnant with Trump's son while he was having the affair with Karen McDougal, then, quote, the risk of unfair prejudice is through the roof. You think? And yet, people are going to vote for him. Well, the judge agreed with Trump's attorneys and ruled that jurors will not be told that Donald Trump cheated on Melania with Karen McDougal while she was pregnant with their son. They'll only be told that Donald Trump cheated on Melania. But voters are going to find out. Voters are going to find out that Melania was pregnant while Donald Trump was sleeping with Playboy Playmate Karen McDougal. The judge also ruled in favor of Trump's attorneys, who argued that jurors should not be told about the dozens upon dozens of women who came forward claiming they too had been sexually assaulted by Donald Trump in the days following the release of that infamous Access Hollywood tape, where Trump bragged that because he's famous, he can get away with grabbing women by the you-know-what. So the jury will not be allowed to be informed of the dozens upon dozens of women who stepped up before the 2016 presidential election right after the Access Hollywood tape was released and said, I was grabbed by the P word by Donald Trump. Well, after the jury selection began, after this argument, the jury selection began. Jury selection is expected to continue for at least 1 week, possibly 2. If Trump's lawyers behave, it will only be 2 weeks. And then the actual trial of Donald Trump begins. Last year, a jury ruled that Donald Trump raped E. Jean Carroll. Earlier this year, another jury ruled he defamed her. Earlier this year, Trump was found guilty of defrauding lenders and was ordered to pay a $500 million fine. This week, he goes on trial for violating campaign finance laws when he tried to hide hush money payments to porn stars, a porn star and a Playboy Playmate that he slept with right after his wife gave birth to their son without a condom. That was with Stormy Daniels. He had sex with Karen McDougal while Melania was pregnant with the son. Next week, the Supreme Court hears oral arguments on whether Trump can be tried in a Miami courtroom for violating the Espionage Act. And can he be tried in a Washington, D.C. courtroom for interfering with the 2020 presidential election? Sometime later this year, he goes on trial in Georgia for racketeering in his attempt to overturn election results in Georgia. Every judge, every prosecutor, practically every witness involved in the 4 criminal trials and civil lawsuits has been swatted and threatened by Trump supporters. Most of the prosecutors require 24-hour round-the-clock protection from Trump's goons. He has never once told his supporters to knock it off. Judge Arthur Engoron had a bomb threat phoned into his home. Trump never stood outside the courtroom doors and ordered his goons to knock it off. Death threats since January 6 against election workers, judges, and politicians are at record highs. You challenge Donald Trump at your own peril, physical peril. Yet somehow, after all that, all this information, there's still no guarantee he's going to lose in November. What do you want to tell yourself a year from now? What do you want to tell your loved ones a year from now? Are Americans this stupid, this immoral, this lazy? Yes. But that explains why Joe Biden is our president and not Bernie Sanders. If Donald Trump ends up back in the Oval Office, Americans are satanic, all of us. If we cannot defeat this orange piece of rat excrement in November, all of us are satanic. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening to me. If you enjoyed any of this, please subscribe to my channel as well as my newsletter, and subscribe and like this episode. I want to thank the super chat. I'm going to read the super chats, okay? This is what I do at the end of the show now. Well, wait a second. How many super chats do I have here? Wait a second. I have a lot of super chats here. Hello, this is Rosalind Lander. Hello from Australia. The latest stabbing in Sydney was a 15-year-old boy who used a flick knife to stab a beloved bishop who is also a right-wing nutjob who would give RFK Jr. a run for his money. Rosalind Lander also writes, Melania has been taking baking a file and a cake classes if anyone wants to know where she has been. Really? I think she wants him stuck in prison. Linda Hamilton writes, hey, David, I'm back. Rosalind Lander, again, after researching this self-styled bishop, I had an awful feeling about why that boy might have wanted to attack him. Our police have called it an act of terrorism. Guffaw. Rosalind Lander continues, I bet Melania has her millions safely tucked away and their son is relieved his smelly rapist father won't embarrass him after his graduation. I agree with you. Would you want if your father were Donald Trump, would you want him showing up at your graduation? Executive Decision writes, no guests on David's show anymore. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong here. Oh, I was reading everybody's chats. Sorry. Richard Hauser, thank you. Liam M. Go to sleep, David. Jean Lingelbach, thank you, David. Jen James, thank you. Frida Love, love your elocution, David. Glad you were here. And Moasto, Great work, David. Been a fan since the Comedy Central Presents. Followed along with the Ralph Nader Radio Hour on KPFK. Thank you. And we have a new one from Christine Patika. Thank you. Wow. Reading super chats. Thank you. Thank you to Bob in the chat room for keeping this civilized. Please leave comments. Unless you're a Trump supporter, your comments won't be seen. Thank you. I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow, but probably Wednesday. Thank you all for listening to me.